13 Questions by Man Transcending. Manhood in the Digital Age.
Welcome back to 13 Questions. Tonight we have an episode with Mark Palmer Steeves Jr. This one, unfortunately, I wasn't able to make. Had a bit of a family emergency that I had to take care of. I can say, Bill, this was an amazing episode. The guest hit on so many points that are really close to me, and I really enjoyed this one. Very much in the wheelhouse of the way that I think. Heard some names pop up there that I never hear people talk about. So, I don't know, this one really spoke to me. I really enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, man, this was a really fun one to have, just the chance to have a conversation with Mark, and fun to record. And going back, I'm editing it right now, actually, as we're recording this intro. We're just not done yet, but so I'm going through it actively and just re-listening to it. It's been a while since the conversation has happened, so going back and rehashing through everything again is super cool. I have high hopes for this episode, so I hope that you guys find value in it. And so I guess value, right? Speaking of, this is not a free podcast. This is a value for value podcast. And if you find value in the show and their content and these conversations, we ask that you find some way to return that to us, whether that be time, talent, treasure, you decide. So if you would like to do that, we have a couple different ways. You can go to our website, which is 13questionspodcast.com, and we have a support page there for PayPal. Or you can buy a book, because we haven't talked about this. It's been a while since we had an episode. There's a lot going on. We've got a lot on the docket right now. So, or just to start from the beginning, right? So we do have a new website, and the website is updated with a page entirely dedicated to the question 3 answers. So every guest that has given an answer to question 3, which is what is the most influential book on your life and why, has been cataloged and linked to. Links have been provided on the site to get you to Amazon if you want to purchase the book, and you'll help support the show that way too. So one other way to support the show: buying a book if you're into reading, which is something you should be. And then another update, website and support related, is our Shungite affiliate link. We do have a Shungite page on the website. For anybody that's listening that doesn't know what Shungite is, it is a mineral used for jewelry, and it's got some energetic properties, and there's a little bit of information on the website about it. But we have a affiliate link with Derek Condit's store, Mystical Wares, and they're in a liminal state right now. So our link is not giving us credit. It'll still get you to the store, I believe. So once you're there and you decide to purchase something, if you use the coupon code 13 questions, you will get a percentage off of your purchase. I believe it's 10%. I will have to double check. And no, it's actually 5%. So if you use the coupon code 13 questions, you will receive 5% off your order, and the show still does get a little bit of support back from your purchases. And on top of that, we have a new affiliate link with Mark Sloan. If you caught the last episode that we put out, it was with Mark Sloan from endalldisease.com. And I talked about my experience with the red light and red light therapy. So we ended up joining his affiliate program, and now we have a link, not on the website yet. I will put it on all social media that we have. when this episode is published, which will be November 2021. So I will share the Red Light affiliate link to all of our social medias for anybody that is interested in that. And then the last thing that we have as far as updates go for the website is a new logo is in the process of being made. Blake Art is collaborating with Adam and I to come up with a new logo for the show, or a logo for the show. And I ran across Blake in the Grammarica chats, so he is part of the community. And I'm super happy to be working with an artist that understands the reasons behind the show and the message and all that. So lots of exciting things to be looking out for. A lot of updates. I feel like I'm talking a lot. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I want to talk about your value. This episode, especially being completely impartial on this one, not having, having sat down with it. One of the things that impacted me the most, and I say one of because it was many, but the one that stands out the most was the statement that podcasts are the new oral tradition. And that spoke to me because it used to be you would have reasons that you would need to sit down around the fire, whatever, to communicate information, the stories, the things that were important. These deep pieces of wisdom that we hold that have been passed down to us. But when do we in this society have the chance to sit down and communicate in that fashion? We don't. People don't do it. But what I find fascinating about the long format podcast is that you're sitting down and forcing yourself to have these long, drawn out conversations that nobody has anymore. So you're forcing yourself into that position. And within doing that, it is an oral tradition. It is recording that wisdom. It is transferring it and, making it accessible to all the generations that are here that got it from those before us. And I don't know, just that thought, to me, that was the entire episode, bang, just worth it just for that. So value for value, I got my value.
Yeah, and it's something that I think is, I don't know, we take it for granted. Like I get content from all these independent producers, such as, Grammarica and, you name it, right? But I make it a point to go out and support them, right? Like I give them money on a monthly basis because it just makes me feel better and I believe in what they're doing, right? So that's just me. I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, if you guys,
if you want your garden to grow, you got to water it, you got to fertilize it, you got to give it attention, and if you do those things, the things you love will grow. So that is in all aspects of life. You want McDonald's to be the biggest corporation on the planet? Eat their breakfast.
Right? Usually McDonald's refers to their customers as users. Like in the corporate headquarters, like at a tangent, sorry, but in Chicago, like their higher ups will refer to anybody that consumes McDonald's as a user, because that's such how they view their customers, right? If that tells you anything. I don't know, we're out of left field. Anyway, yeah, so you want to do the gratitude jingle?
Yeah, sorry, I was just looking up a crazy statistic that McDonald's feeds about 1% of the world's population every day. That 1% of all people on the planet eat at McDonald's.
Is it? Okay, that's a lot.
68 million people as of a bunch of studies that I'm seeing.
Didn't they used to have that like on their signs too? Like McDonald's would say like
9 out of 10 Americans
served or whatever.
Let's see, 9 out of 10 Americans eat there at least once a year. Some huge statistics. Imagine if 9 out of 10 Americans listened and donated at least once to 13 questions. We'd have Michael Jordan on. We'd be bigger than Rogan.
Episode. Yeah.
So I'd like to thank all the users out there for joining us tonight.
Right. But yeah, the more you support, back to that. That's what we were talking about. The more you water the garden, the more it'll grow. And we were going to do the gratitude.
Gratitude, 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 oh, gratitude. Gratitude, 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 oh, gratitude.
I think I'm gonna go ahead and go first, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
So, my gratitude, we touch on it a little bit in the episode, but I wanted to bring it up in the intro to give it some extra emphasis, because that's how important I think it is, right? But I'm grateful for cacao, right? Chocolate. It's a superfood. We've essentially bastardized it by pumping it full of sugar, but taken in its pure form, it can be used for ceremonial purposes in certain dosages, and obviously it has a physical effect on your 3D body in this dimension, but it also has an effect on your energetic body, right? Your spiritual body. And cacao works specifically with your heart energy. We were just talking about heart stuff a little bit ago before recording. So, I've been doing a lot of heart centered work, right? And having a lot of good results in the relationships, in the relationships with the people around me. So, it sounds kind of weird that drinking chocolate on a daily basis would help you communicate with those around you in a more loving way, but that's exactly what happened to me. So
no, I mean, it can make sense. Your heart has neurons in it, proven by science. There's an actual extra brain inside of your heart. I mean, it's why you can feel things in your heart. And I mean, superfoods and nootropics, these nutrients that you take in that increase your brain's ability to think, why wouldn't there be other foods out there that could help increase other parts of your body's ability to function in the way that they work, including another brain inside of your chest? So yeah, absolutely. That, on the surface may seem, out there crazy, but from a base scientific level, of course,
Yeah, and there's so much to learn more about the plant, and I'm just beginning, right? So I encourage anybody, if this is, it sounds interesting to you in any way, go out and explore cacao. I do have a guest in mind for the future to talk more about this. So hopefully this won't be the end of the cacao discussion. So I'm gonna.
No, I love that idea of learning from the plants. You hear this in ayahuasca. They were able to take a MAOI inhibitor and put it into this, within this one plant and mix it in with another plant so that it can extract the DMT from the plant, and then you get a long form absorption into your body. And this is used for ceremonial uses or for drug addiction treatment. And what gets crazy within all that is you ask these indigenous people, well, how did you figure out that these two plants need to be processed in this way together? And they're like, well, the plants told us. And that type of thing makes sense. Why is it that when you ingest cannabis or a psychedelic or a different type of plant or even tobacco or something that's fermented, it changes the way you think? What are these intrinsic qualities to these things and the way that they make you think? Are you, in a way, imbibing part of the essence of this plant? Can you learn and gain information? And, I think the answer is probably yes. Things can change the way that you act. The mineral lithium bonded to orotate, something that is found in minerals and springs in different places, can also be taken and it can help people with neurologic issues. It's a mineral deficiency. zinc and magnesium deficiencies can cause issues. Number one leading cause of migraines. So yeah,
Magnesium.
it's fascinating when you just kind of dive into that. Yeah, a little bit of this might drastically change the way that your body interfaces with the world on a psychological level, an energetic level, and a spiritual level.
Yeah, I believe that's one of the things that cacao helps replenish in the body is magnesium. And I think that the majority of people are deficient of magnesium.
Yeah, according to the neurologist that I used to see,
Yeah.
the number one cause of migraine was magnesium deficiency.
Right. And I don't suffer from migraines, but you
Bless
do,
your
so
heart.
maybe this would help you. I'd be interested to see what this does. Like, I'll get you some if you.
Oh yeah, I've been using.
Try it out.
I need to use some more of it. The magnesium spray that you sent me.
Oh, from Alpha Vedic. That's right.
Yep, and I also wear migraine glasses made by no affiliate, TerraMed. Highly recommended product. Blocks out
Right.
the most common forms of blue light associated with like LEDs and fluorescent lighting.
Yeah. So.
You can cut that. I don't even know why I said it.
Don't know where we left off.
We were in the middle of gratitudes.
Oh yeah. That's what I wanted to add was the gratitude part. Like, so we do have the gratitude jingle, right? And part of doing a ceremony or having a cacao ceremony, doing these ceremonial doses, there's a little opening thing that you can do, a little ritual, if you will. And part of that ritual is giving gratitude, expressing gratitude to, well, basically, it can be whatever you want, right? But the fact is that gratitude is brought up again. And it's just part of, infusing the cacao with that frequency, the gratitude frequency, the love frequency, and then, giving it an extra boost, right? You're putting your good chi into it or whatever, however you want to turn it, right? And then, yeah, I've had good luck with it, and would encourage people to explore it. I think that's probably the second time I said that. But
Yeah, listen, food is medicine ultimately. How many supplements and cures for debilitating. It's weird that there's plants out there that when people take them, they no longer get seizures. Well, what does that mean? And these are the things that we should think about with all things. And all people are made different. And what works for you may not work for somebody else. And, there are these things that people can poo-poo on, but have great intrinsic magical properties to them. And we just got to know how to find them. Got to find out what's right for you.
Right. And you can only do that by experience. And just one last thing on cacao, and then I'll promise I'll stop talking about it. But I imagine people will have a question of like, well, how do you know it's working, right? Well, one of the things that you can look for is that welling sensation that you get in your heart area when you're really happy, right? Like tears of joy. So that could be a marker that you can kind of have in mind when you're, if you want to do this experiment or whatever. So yeah, last thought on cacao. What is your gratitude?
I'll probably say this best by saying hints at the great mystery, synchronicities, consciousness qualities of consciousness that cross species. The last couple of days have been crazy for myself. And it's been very strange in the fact that, I had to miss this episode because my cat wasn't doing very well. And in that time, my cat has passed. But it's weird because I know two other people that are having very similar things happen with their cat. A coworker of mine leaving work on the exact same day for emergency surgery, having to do a lot of the same things. She has a dog, but for her animal, happening at the exact same time. Yesterday, Angie had surgery, and I wouldn't have been home. And I think my cat had a mini stroke or something, some blood clotting issue while I was there. And I wouldn't have been home. And I was there for that and able to rush her to the emergency vet. And was able to pick Angie up from the hospital and then go right back. And these are the things like, well, I've never known anybody else that's hand feeding their animals with syringe. And now I know 3 people at the exact same time. And on the same day that all this happens, you, Bill, get another cat.
Yes, sir. Cat number 3 for us.
And it's these weird things that pop up. And in her passing, we brought her home so that my other cat could have closure, because she didn't know what was going on. She saw me running out with her sister in a not good state, losing consciousness, and rushing her out the door. And I'm like, she needs something. She needs to know, and she's not going to know unless she sees her. And she went through all the stages of grief like a human. And this cat, I should say, is a feral cat that was brought into the house. She walked up as a kitten on my friend, and we kept her. She's wild. You know, she's very well trained now for the most part, but she's got feral in her. And it was amazing to see the human, these qualities of consciousness that we think are human, in the way that crows have a crow's funeral. That when we first brought her in, she got angry, really angry, and angry at me. She was dead looking me in the eye, tail flipping, just like hatred. Like, that's what it felt like, at least. It was palpable. And she was angry at us. She wouldn't let us pet her. She didn't want any attention. And over the next hour and a half, 2 hours, she came around to wanting to be around us, to needing the attention from being, just better, going and smelling her sister, and then being uncomfortable with her. Like, she seemed to start, and I was like, okay, well, I think we need to, we need to take her. This is time for her to go back so that we can have her body cremated. And Angie asked Luna if, she's like, look, this is the last time you're going to see your sister. If you have anything you want to say, just like a very human thing to say to her. And she came back over. She sniffed her sister. And then she walks away, and she speaks 5 or 6 seconds of, I say nonsensical to me because it was a language. It was like she was speaking. She wasn't just meowing. She was articulating something. And she just speaks it. She walks and just starts speaking this. And she comes back over, smells her sister one last time. And then just in this way, she just flips her tail and just walks away with purpose. And I was this whole thing, it felt like these are the things that humans do. She even she gave word, the whole thing. And so this aspect, just seeing the human qualities of how we handle things being reflected in the same way within an animal, and these synchronicities. So when I say the deep mysteries, I don't know what it means. I don't think anybody does, but it lets me know that there's some other meaning. There's some other deep patterns. There's some other things that connect us all, that I've connected this before, but it opens my mind to the great realities. Because
go ahead.
It allow those things, when I see those types of things, I start to think of, string theory, pick your theory, the idea that consciousness and everything emerges from a wave, a pattern, or something underneath that matter is physically manifest from. And I think of Terence McKenna talking about fractals and oceans, or I should say fractals and when they started creating them in computers, these fractal designs, and they started realizing that they started to look like a lot of things in nature. And one of the things he saw in nature, these fractals would kind of have these curvings that kind of look like shorelines or alcoves or things that you'd see with like water along an ocean. And so he was walking along the ocean and he comes across a black rock. And it was just a unique rock that stood out. And so he keeps walking and he comes across another rock. It's not the same, but it looks similar. And so being that he's thinking about these fractals, he's like, I decided to count my steps back. And he goes, when I got to that, and I don't forget what it was, but let's say it was like 386 or 326 or something like that. And he goes back and he goes, and then I keep walking from that rock. And he goes, and then when I get to, 350 something, I see another black rock. It's not the same. It's not in the exact spot, but it's similar. It's like right here. And he goes, what does this mean? Does this mean that there's going to be a black rock every so many feet along the ocean? No. But it starts to feed into this idea, why is that black rock there? Well, because there's this underlying pattern. The rock is there because it's part of that fractal design. It's part of the reason it's there is because of this pattern, because of this underlying thing, the Fibonacci sequence, this base component. And if that rock is there for that reason, why am I here? Why are you here? Why are there these patterns? And so it just starts to open my mind up to these greater possibilities, these very deep religious possibilities of, you are the God within. Where is God? Well, if I am an answer to the equation, human beings are here because we fulfill some form of this pattern that is manifest, and a fractal repeats itself over and over. And yeah, the planets aren't going to be in the exact same orbits every single time, but they're going to be in the same flavor of orbits. Maybe when history starts repeating itself, it's flavors of the same thing, that this evolution is constantly continuing. The idea of Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance really starts to make sense. And so when I say just having that access to the deep mysteries, having those experiences of just these, even in sadness and tragedy, being able to just put those questions together. I don't know, that brings me a lot of understanding that, like, we're not just here for any reason. We're here for a reason. We are the reason. And I can't say what those reasons are, but some part of reality is always getting better. And there's baked in parts that, based on us just being here, whether you're a cat or a human, we share things. And where does that come from? So just being able to see those great mysteries. I don't know. Otherwise, I'd be freaking out about life right now.
Right. Yeah, right. Who wouldn't? But that's the spice of life right there, man. That's what you're talking about. Like the thing with the synchronicities, like I think the more that you follow them, the more that they happen. And then the whole thing with the cats, like that's a synchro. So like case in point, this entire show was one big synchronicity. And then I was also going to point out that we touch on it in the interview. Mark brings it up. It is Hermeticism, which is an ancient mystery school or thought school. I think it traces back to Egypt and Hermes Trismegistus and all that. The Emerald Tablets. Anyway, one of the tenets is as above, so below. Mm-hmm. And what you were kind of talking about is like the complexity and the simplicity and the fractal thing.
Yeah.
And then Mark was talking about what I just said, the complexity and the simplicity thing, and as above, so below. So like, yeah, there's definitely some kind of
well, and not to dive back into the fractals, I watched a documentary done by David Lynch on transcendental meditation. And one of the things he mentions about it is this thing that you connect with, this thing that when you go into this transcendental meditation state that you go to, this conscious level that you reach. It's always been there. It always has been. It always will be. Well, that's very religious, but that's a fractal. Like, it's a pattern that is and always is. And then when I start to just wrap around just that simple idea, then, the idea of creation and destruction and all these other things, just, even though I can't explain it, because we live in a world where, there's a linear time and everything has a creation and an ending. We see it in life and birth. So at least in my mind, no beginnings don't make any sense, but a system that by its very nature is just a repeating pattern on a constant evolutionary point. It can't be anything else other than a fractal. You know what I mean? Like, the fractal is a fractal. It is the as above, so below.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's
I think
crazy,
we jumped off a tangent there with the
we did.
gratitudes, but
And you know what else we forgot? We forgot to talk about how we know the guest. We usually do that first thing, but I can do that now.
I think it's a primed opportunity.
Yes, perfect timing. Thanks, universe. Yeah. So, past guest, Starving Pilgrim. I don't recall the episode number, but it is the episode that released January, the first episode of this year, 2021. So if you go back and look for it, Starving Pilgrim is the guy that recommended that I get in touch with Mark. And so I was talking to Ben, it's his real name, Starving Pilgrim's name, and just kind of, asking him for more information, right? And one of the things that he mentioned was that Mark has a big heart, and with all this heart talk about cacao and everything, it's just another.
That's interesting, because isn't that the episode where he mentioned about showing up in a remote viewing session of some kind?
Ben, probably, yeah. That wouldn't surprise me.
I want to say that was the episode, which would be interesting because I never really talk about my other podcast here. But what I did that transcendental meditation for would have been, it was the heart of my last episode. So yeah, I don't know. Just I find that interesting because I was not aware of how you met this guest until now.
Yeah. So, and I wanted to include that because Mark does some work for Sam Tripoli. So, and then there's some other names that get dropped in the episode too. So I just wanted to make sure that this piece of the story was included and that that Ben's name was mentioned, not because I'm trying to give him props or followers or anything. It's just because it's pertinent to the conversation. And honestly, I would venture to guess that he doesn't listen to every episode of 13 Questions, but I'll probably tell him to listen to this one. So, yeah, speaking of listening to the episode, let's get into the interview and, yeah, value for value, guys.
Check out the website, send us an email, tell us what you think, ideas for questions, support the show, water your garden, and more importantly than anything, spread the wisdom, spread the knowledge. This is trying to think of the word, sorry.
The dawning of the age of Aquarius.
This is I can't think of it. It's what we said at the beginning. It's the story that people tell nowadays.
Oh, so the new oral tradition.
Yes. This is the new oral tradition. Yeah, support the show. This is the new oral tradition. It is. I was going to say this is the future, but really, we're boiling down the information of the past. So yeah, support the new oral tradition.
Right, the future is now. Time. That's even dude. I wanted to get into time a little bit, but this intro is long enough. We'll get into that later on another episode. And there's more cat stories to come.
We already have.
So, yeah. But for now, this is 13 questions with Mark Palmer Steeves Jr.
I'm excited because I remember like 5-6 years ago, maybe it was 5 years ago, I saw 13 questions come up in my Grimerica Patreon feed. And I never fully listened. I think I listened to a couple episodes, but I was aware that it existed. So then like now looking back, the fact that I'm like talking to you, obviously there's like a chain of events. Darren and Graham started it, passed it along. I'm just stoked at the synchronicity because I'm like, this podcast like stuck out in my mind when I was just a random podcast listener, didn't have my own show, and now I'm on it. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, my whole like journey to be a part of this is one big synchronicity. Like with Grimerica and everything, it's wild. Like I don't even know what I'm doing. So it's exciting to see what this thing's going to turn into.
Very cool.
Yeah, but I was going to say, I heard about 13 questions. I don't think it was through the Patreon, but I was really excited when Darren came out with the project because like at first there was going to be like more of a one-on-one like counseling type thing idea is what he had in mind, I believe. And then there were also some free classes that TJ Walker was offering on communication. And there was a bunch of other things planned, and I was super excited, like over the toply excited about this project, like just like you were when you first heard about it. And then like now all of a sudden like I'm here doing it. So it's like what? What?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Definitely. I think the Grimerica show is like a hub of synchronistic energy for sure.
It is. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Darren is some kind of shaman or wizard or something.
Yeah, he's just very low key about it.
Yeah. Whether he likes to admit it or not. I know he doesn't like D&D. I just wrapped up my D&D session. We played for 3 years, I think. Finally finished up.
Wow,
this past weekend.
It's a long time,
right? Session once a month, and we missed some months, so it took forever to get through, the game, but we did it.
I'm in that community, but I can imagine like the people are like, oh, our D&D game totally got thrown off, but because of COVID, like pandemic themes start like making their way into the story or something,
right? I can see that.
Bound to cause some conflicts potentially,
right? Yeah, it was. Yeah, I'll spare you the details. It was a quick game because divine intervention came in and killed the main dude, which is like one in 1,000 chance of happening. So
it sounds like it.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm sorry that I didn't send you the questions beforehand. I'm usually pretty good at that. So
I think whether I talked to you about it, but I kind of wanted to do it as fresh as possible. But then like an hour before, I'm like, you know what? Let me look over the questions. Okay. Right now. That pre-show nervousness hit me. Right. So I have them in front of me. But yeah, I'm ready to go whenever you are, dude.
All right. Well, let's get into it. Question number 1. What was the best advice ever given to you? Would you modify it at all today?
So this one was super easy because I just had my Sifu on my podcast. So the guy who taught me martial arts when I was in high school and after high school, something that he said to me that he reminded me of when we spoke recently is something that really stuck with me when he told it to me for the first time, which is like, you can't blame anybody because everyone is just an amalgamation of everything that's happened to them. and everybody's kind of sorting out that in their own lives. And being a conspiracy theorist, probably from birth, I've always tried to assign causality to things. And that was a release from that sort of angst, I guess I could call, for trying to find an explanation for everything. And I think I've ultimately, at this young age, 27 years old, kind of determined that that's not really the purpose that I'm trying to lead anymore. Like, finding the answers to everything isn't as appealing as it used to be. And I think that's because the goalposts have gotten pushed back, in the sense of, like, it's no longer about finding the answers. It's about, understanding the whole mystery. And I think that might sound similar, but when you're in it, you might understand kind of the differences. There's like a simplicity and then a complexity, and that complexity becomes very, very overwhelming from the simplistic mindset. But then there's like a flip turn that happens where you see, it's all so simple, even though it is very, 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 very complex.
Right. So it sounds like what your Sifu was trying to say is that there's really nobody you can point the finger at when it comes to events that like happen, right? And like to assign blame, because in my mind, because I don't know, I was thinking about this a little bit a few weeks ago about how trauma occurs, and people like to say that events created trauma, like whatever bad, like you got a car accident, right? So boom, car accident created trauma, right? So that obviously you're hurt. So maybe that's a bad example. But anyway, my point was events occur, right? But it's how we react to them is what really creates the trauma to those around us, because the event and how we process it and then expel it, reflect it back out into the universe is going to affect those around us, right? And then, that's where the bad part of the equation comes in, not like the event happening. It's how you process it and then let it go. I don't know if I rambled too much there. Sorry.
Don't worry. Yeah, that's totally on page with, what I've experienced, just kind of being quick to react at a young age, kind of having a short temper, and being in a sort of environment that not forced me into martial arts, but it felt like that was the best, safest choice, rather than just getting into more and more fights with other people in school and feeling like, more and more desperate. Martial arts kind of brought this confidence to my life that I really didn't feel comfortable in, because I was always, again, assigning blaming other people and not focused on myself enough to, really work on those self-disciplinary type of mental attributes that martial arts kind of brought into my life.
So that was something that you chose to do then? That wasn't something that like you were enrolled into as a young age? Martial arts?
Yeah, I definitely chose to. There was like a couple events in school where, like, it was either after school or during school where I'd gotten into a fight, and I always got into fights just mostly because I was like kind of a class clown and had sort of an ego, and felt like because I was taller than most of my peers that like I could say whatever I want and not get challenged. And that was like really humbling to be challenged and realize like, oh, people aren't afraid to knock me off my ladder, and that's where I sort of transitioned into becoming what some people have called like a gentle giant. Cause like as much martial arts as I know, I'm not fighting anybody, I mean, the less I train martial arts, the shorter my temper gets. And I only say that because for the past few years, I haven't been doing as much martial arts as I used to. But there was definitely like an imperative that was pushed on me. And I made that choice like, well, I should learn martial arts. And also UFC was very popular at the time. So it was like on television. There were movies about it coming out. So martial arts just became more in the mainstream around that age for me too. So as opposed to like maybe joining a karate school or joining like the wrestling team, I went straight for Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because that was kind of like what I was seeing on UFC. But I also was on the wrestling team, and I also took a karate class to start. Like you got to start somewhere. So it was definitely like one thing of like thinking I was going to join in to learn to be this big, tough, badass fighter guy. And then realizing like, oh, I really enjoy teaching people things. And I really enjoy like helping my Sifu run the class. And like, that's where my communication kind of blossomed. And I learned how to convey things that were in my mind to a crowd or to a class even. And then like, managing kids between the ages of 8 and 15 and all of their short attention spans, that, brought a whole nother level of patience. So, I mean, I could probably connect all 13 of these questions to what I've learned in martial arts, but yeah, I'll leave it there. And to modify it, I don't think I could modify it. I think what Ryan, my Sifu, said was just so true, that like people are an amalgamation of everything that's happened to them, just like all the things that have happened to you, And I think people who get into that mindset of assigning blame to things, when you point that out, it's like, oh, wow, okay, I'm to blame, and it brings like this level of clarity that that offered a huge release for me at that age, for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Martial arts is something that I wish I would have gotten into when I was younger. I mean, I guess it's never too late, right? But
Sure.
Question number 2. What do you choose to ignore?
That's an easy one with, the given events of the past 2 years. The media, I ignore the media, honestly. I mean, it's funny. I even had like Jay Dyer, who's been on this show before, on my show. And I told him straight up, I'm like, dude, I don't even watch movies, but I respect what you do, decoding and showing the symbols in these movies, because that just brings so much more confidence to my decision of not watching movies, because there is that programming, that subtle weaponization that's going on. So with running the risk of sounding like a jaded Luddite, I definitely have pushed all of those influence out of my life. I have DVDs, I have like Kung Fu movies and stuff that I like. I have some mainstream movies that I like, but for the most part, I've really pushed out anything that isn't created independently. Like podcasts, I only listen to really independent podcasts. If a podcast is super overproduced, I tend to not really be as interested in it as something that you can tell someone is putting their hard-earned time into, making themselves. And then books, of course, can't really say that they're independent, but for the subjects that I'm looking into, they're definitely strange. So yeah, I would say books are a huge thing for me. And it's really easy to ignore all those other influences when you have like all these books you can dive into, like a whole world, and something that's really been interesting recently is finding books that help me learn more about the area I'm in. And New England, where I'm from, has a long history, and that's been super interesting getting into that. So it's easy to answer this one. I choose to ignore anything that's not like helping me grow, and media is like the best way to sum that up, and I think a lot of people let that hold them back. But if you're listening to this podcast, obviously I don't think you're particularly in that camp, because you're obviously looking for things to get out of the mainstream, like this independent podcast here.
Yeah, definitely. The media is something that I have stopped completely paying attention to. The one thing that I do kind of indulge in is watching Star Trek reruns. But
I was just about to say, I have Twilight Zone, Star Trek, the original series, and like I think the animated version of Star Trek for whatever reason, and that's it. Like that's like the most TV shows I have. Maybe like the first season of Seinfeld, and other than those, like I never watch TV. Like sometimes I'll put one of those on if I'm really bored. But yeah, Star Trek is legit.
Right, and I can stream that online for free. So that's. Other than that, though, yeah, dude, I cut the cable years ago, and it's just podcasts and books. Obviously, our next question is about books. So, what book has been most influential on your life, and why?
Yeah, well, this one's tough because there's definitely been a couple really influential books. I'm gonna go back to like when I was really young. I would say, real quick, I should touch on this. Ripley's Believe It or Not was pretty big because, like, number one, the book was like visually super appealing. Like, you get that book, it's got a crazy holographic cover, and then inside of it are all kinds of anomalies and mysteries and things that you can learn about. There's records and like freaks and things that aren't as interesting to someone like me or yourself. But I thought Ripley's Believe It or Not was like a huge mind opener for me when I was a kid, because I'm like, oh, they're talking about these things as if they're real and actually happened. And, for the most part, at that time, I was born in 94. So like between 2000 and 2010, things became very scientism, and the internet, I think, pushed that in, like at least in the school system. Like we were all really supposedly like interested in space and the internet, the space age, the internet age. When I was totally sold on like spontaneous combustion and Sasquatch and Loch Ness and UFO sightings, which were all in that book. And then that made a book that more seriously, I would say, is the answer to this question. The Secret History of the World by Mark Booth. That brought that book into so much more credibility, in the sense that I already found like all these weird things that didn't add up. And then this book kind of put it together in a history or a chronology that didn't like leave portions of history out. It was like, okay, here's what happened spiritually, and here's how it connected to the material things going on. I don't know the veracity of that book, but what he does a good job of is showing you how mythology is a lot less mythological than we assume. That word mythology has a huge misconception. People tend to think like if something's a myth, then that means that it never happened. Like they conflate the meaning of the word myth with like hearsay or rumor, when really like myth is incredibly important to the story of who we are as human beings. So seeing those weird anomalies like Bigfoot and Loch Ness and having a kind of holistic mindset, I was like, there's no way that science is right if they can't explain these things. If there are things left out of their paradigm, and I think this isn't like a genius thought on my end, I think a lot of people come to this conclusion, but that book in particular by Mark Booth, The Secret History of the World, showed me a side of history that was so much more interesting than anything I had learned in any social studies or history class, and it was really mind blowing, because once I really got into the podcasting world and listening to podcasts and seeing how many people were talking about all these things that happened in his book, I associated all those things with his book. Little did I know there was hundreds more books on all the topics that he included in that book. So I think that book was like a very, very well written entry for me into this world.
That's amazing. Two amazing answers. Number one, because I just got done compiling all of question 3 answers and put it in a list on a website. And So I'm looking at looking at the whole list, all the books, and then Ripley's Believe It or Not is so unique. Like, did not expect that to pop up. So that's awesome. That's exciting. But this Secret History of the World book by Mark Booth, that sounds really cool. Does he? And maybe you don't know, and maybe you can just maybe give your opinion on this, since we're kind of talking conspiracy a little bit. What is his overarching kind of reason for to put it into, I guess, maybe to put it back into your Sifu's terms, like what is the reason for, like, if people are looking for something to blame, like what would he give as the question, or that answer? Like, are there secret bloodlines? Are there, because I'm of the mind, like, bloodlines are tied to the giants somehow from pre-flood times. So
what's interesting about this book is he doesn't typically take that, like, there's no thesis for the book other than this is an esoteric version of history. So he doesn't really assign like roles in that sense of like, well, these guys are the bad guys in history and these guys are the good guys. He kind of just shows you like where the bad guys and the good guys were using esoteric or mystical means to accomplish what we are told they did in our secular or edited versions of history. So like, for example, a lot of the scientists of the Enlightenment period were also alchemists and occultists. We don't remember them for that, but they were also alchemists and occultists, and that was a big, big reason why they made the discoveries that they did. That's never, ever really highlighted in a typical, 101 science class. So I think that was very pivotal. Not the players, but also like what was actually going on in history, and how much the occult and the esoteric aspects of life were really valued. Because it seems like in our time, they're not valued. They're considered fringe. They're considered, not serious pursuits. So it was really startling to see how that had been flipped upside down. And in the past, it was considered like the height of accomplishment to be a polymath and be a magician and be like a skilled thinker in many different things. Now we're all specialists, now we all specialize in one thing. And I think our world really is for the worst because of that. This idea of like, how many people does it take to change a light bulb? I think a lot when nobody knows how to put the light bulb together, because you have one guy who makes the glass and then one guy who finds the tungsten and then the other guy creates the rim, the metal rim. So I think there's totally, a need in today's world for that holistic view that's offered through this book, where he doesn't really like offer up anything particularly new in the light of like theories and who did what. He's just showing you like, no, this is what they said they were doing, and we're going to emphasize the esoteric mystical side, because for the most part, history emphasizes the material and secular side of things, or the extreme war. That was what I got from my history classes when I was in school, was like war, more war, the gods angry, like it's all like structured around war, our history lessons. So to get a history lesson that was kind of structured around religion and spirituality and mysticism, which I think is more accurate of a term than spirituality, mysticism, and seeing where mysticism played a role in the past was a big unveiling for me.
So it sounds like he would have had a podcast if he was alive today, the author, right? Like, I
think he is alive.
Is he?
Yeah, he's been on the Grimerica show, actually.
Is he?
Okay. Yeah, he's done an interview
into that.
Yeah, he's what's interesting too about his book is, in conjunction with his research, he also spoke with a woman named Lorna Byrne, and she's a channeler, and she channels the Archangel Michael. So it is similar to channeled text in that way, but it doesn't rely on just channelings like a lot of what we would consider channeling. It's kind of like a mix of both, where this guy got all the resources and then brought it to her and said, well, this is what I found. What does your angel tell you about what happened at this time?
What?
It's a pretty interesting approach. Yeah, too.
I love channel like Seth Speaks and Law of One, the Book of Ra, like all that material. Like,
yeah.
Definitely got to check that out then.
Please
all right.
do.
Question number 4. What rule do you have for yourself that you never break, and why do you think that it's important?
This one's very interesting. Very interesting question. It's hard to think of that. I don't know how other people have answered this question, but I would say a rule that I have for myself is to always be honest, because when I was younger, I wasn't always honest. I was definitely the type of kid that liked to tell tall story or tall tales. And like, I thought that would be a way to get more friends, was to tell like fantastical stories. And I think a lot of kids do this. It wasn't anything particular to me, but I realized as I got older how much the dishonesty held me back from making genuine friendships and authentic connections. I noticed that almost karmically, like people would then go and do the same thing about me. I would tell people stuff that maybe they didn't think was true. And then next thing I know, the whole school thinks one thing of me that I don't even know who the hell came up with it, rumors and hearsay, to use those words again. But so since I got, probably around 19, 18, 20 years old, around there, I really decided like, okay, there's no more room to be anything but honest, because every time I've been dishonest, it's come back to bite me or held me back or gotten in the way of something I truly could have been good at, or got in the way of a friendship that might have been still around. I definitely could say I have more old friends than current friends. So yeah, being honest, that's the new rule for me. And sometimes that's another thing that'll stop you from having friends too, because a lot of people don't like when you're too honest, and I tend to be that way sometimes, where I'll like tell someone straight up, very blunt, how I feel about them and how they're making an impression on me. And it's only my impression. It doesn't say anything about them, but I think most people don't even really see the world the same way I do. So sometimes it's hard to convey that to the average person. So as a rule, I've decided I just got to be as honest as I possibly can be, to remove any misunderstandings that might come across,
Yeah. And then after, that's all you can do, because after that, it's up to the other person to react to that. And if we're all thinking along the lines of not taking anything personally, which is one of Carlos Castaneda's 4 rules. I only know this because I made this book list thing recently. But yeah, and that speaks to, along the same lines of Stoicism, managing our emotions.
Don Miguel Ruiz's 4 agreements, right? That's what.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And the only reason, I don't want to correct you, I'm sure you read through a lot of books on that list. But the reason I bring that up is because Carlos Castaneda's book was like number 3 on my thing of books that I would have used to answer that question. Ripley's Believe It or Not and Secret History of the World took the top 2 spots, but the third was Secret Teachings of Don Juan. Or no. Secret. It's just The Teachings of Don Juan, A Yaqui Way by Carlos Castaneda. And that book is interesting because it's definitely like controversial in the sense that a lot of people have a lot of things to say about Castaneda. Like I have all of his books, and I also have 4 books by other authors like criticizing his work. So I've been really into him as an author and why he became a cult leader and all that stuff. But why I'll always stand up for him is because he had a big impact on my life. Whether Don Juan existed or not, whether Castaneda made that information up or not, the idea of an ally and having an ally was extremely important. That might come up in a future question, so I'll kind of cut it there. But it's definitely glad that you made that little mistake, because you gave me the opportunity to elaborate on Castaneda. He's definitely an interesting person for sure. But Don Miguel Ruiz has that book, The Four Agreements.
Right. Right on. Yeah. Castaneda is a really interesting dude. I didn't know anything about him until that guy, who has an episode called That Guy on 13 Questions, he mentioned it on his interview. And
Okay.
so, yeah, I still haven't really delved into that subject yet, but it sounds super interesting. Yeah, but okay, maybe it'll come up again. Nothing happens on accident, right? All right. Question number 5. If I were to ask your best friend, what is the one thing they would say you need to work on the most, and why?
Oh man. All right, so this is gonna sound super sad, but it's not. Trust me, it's not. So I don't really have a best friend anymore, unfortunately, because I used to do my podcast with my best friend, and then just things happen, and now we're not friends anymore. I still have the show, still doing it, but one of the funny things that we used to kind of tease each other about was like, Jay would always tell me, "Oh, you got to have more respect, Mark." Like, and I would always think, like, what the hell is this guy talking about? Telling me I'm disrespectful. I don't have enough respect. And it became like a running, like, inside joke amongst all of our friends. Like, people would just be like, disrespect, whenever I would say something with a lot of like passion. And I think what it was is I get very passionate about what I believe in. And I sometimes can steamroll my friends and peers. And like that was happening on the podcast, where like I was the only one who I felt like was doing any pre-show research. I was the only one looking for guests. I was the only one doing all of the things to keep a podcast going. And they would just show up every week. And that was fine. I was cool with that. But it got to a point where like I was being kind of disrespectful to them, because I wanted them to be more a part of it than they actually were capable of participating, not because they were like, bad people or something, but it just wasn't their thing. Like they don't listen to podcasts on their own. They only listen to podcasts when I was hanging out with them and like driving and had control over the aux, I'd be like, no, turn that music off. We're listening to a podcast. You boys are going to learn something today, and that was like my attitude. And it was always kind of encouraging, but I think over time they got like a little overwhelmed by it. And it is what it is, like we're still friends in some sense, and I have no hard feelings about them, but they definitely humbled me a bit and taught me that I need to be more respectful for other people's path, other people's paths in life, because, Jay just wasn't on the same path as me. And as fun as it was to joke around with him and do the first 50 or so episodes of my podcast with him, it became like a work relationship rather than a friendship. And, I didn't like being the boss of my friends. I didn't like bossing them around, but I want to excel at this. I care about this. And, not everybody has an opportunity to just jump right into it with big players like Sam Tripoli, like he gave me a lot of really awesome opportunities to be a part of this whole podcasting world. So I couldn't like let that go. And that's why I took it very seriously and pushed my friends away from the podcast. But like I said, no hard feelings. I'm sure Jay will come around eventually. But yeah, I think it would make him happy at least to hear me say that I could be a little more respectful.
Well, when you're passionate about something and you're doing it to help other people and you want them to care about it too, I mean, that's completely understandable, to be kind of, to be like that. But at the same time, respecting other people's paths, that's actually something that my fiance and I have kind of been talking about recently with so, events going on, people that are close to you may or may not be making some, health related decisions, or maybe, lifestyle choices, or, what have you. And, you just gotta take a moment and kind of step back and realize that they chose, if you think the way that, the way that I do, they chose to come here to have the, an experience, and this is what they want. And, that's fine. And, you got to respect that. And it's hard to sometimes because, you care, right?
Yeah, that's why I did an interview with Dr. Andrew Wakefield. I don't want to get your show flagged or anything, so I'll be careful with my words. But yeah, I had that same feeling, man. And it was really hard to hear, people in my life make that decision and not, obviously they weren't going to listen to me because I'm the conspiracy theorist and I have a podcast called My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. But at the same time, I was kind of like, hey guys, I've been worried about this stuff for 5 years. Not since March. So it's not like I just picked my head out from under my rock and and got on my soapbox. Like, I've been worried about this type of thing for a while. I think I have an informed opinion about it. And I did those podcasts, with guys like Dr. Andrew Wakefield for that. And it wasn't my primary interest. I want to talk about aliens, ancient civilizations, things like that in my podcast. But I totally hear you, man. It's on a spiritual level. I totally resonate with what you just said, where you have to respect your peers and your family and your friends, your loved ones' paths in life at all costs, it seems, and that can come with a little bit of sacrifice as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's definitely an area that provides an opportunity for growth. Just because it's a challenge. I mean, the obstacle becomes the way, right? So, question number 6. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
So I love this question. I think, lately it's been, like I said or alluded to earlier, my local area and diving into the history of this area around me. Somebody who synchronistically kind of came into my life in a really funny way was Michael Wan. I remember listening to him on the Grimerica show, on many other podcasts. And then, one thing leads to another, and he's on my podcast. Another thing leads to another. And now I'm doing a podcast with him every week. And it's really cool. So why I even bring him into that is because he's somebody who's very well known for diving into his local area. He's the Susquehanna sage because he's, living on the Susquehanna River for some years now and noticed all these strange things, started researching and found a whole lot of information that really brings light or sheds light on why our society is the way it is and what's really going on behind the scenes. So now I'm super, super turned on, so to speak, to get into my own area, like New England, and discover, why, things are the way they are, particularly ancient cultures and how they evidence for their presence can still be found and how it's kind of overlooked. Like, I'm not sure where you live, but in New England, there are stone walls everywhere. Like in colonial towns, especially, you'll see people who have houses with a stone fence. It's just like a pile of stone as a fence, right? And the common explanation for these stone fences was that when the colonists first settled here, they used them to divvy out land. They would pile these rocks up and divvy up land. That's a fine explanation for some, but the majority of these stone rows, in my opinion, do not look like they could have been made easily by people who were here as colonists. Because if you also listen or read what they said about living here, they don't mention doing that. None of the colonists mentioned building those stone rows or stone fences. They say that they were already here, which is really strange, right? So now we have this possibility that 80 to 90% of these stone fences were already there. What is that? How? So I have way more questions than answers, but to kind of give the more skeptical people listening some like more validity to the whole subject, the same reason why we question the pyramids or any other megalithic stone structure is the same reason I'm questioning these stone rows, because with the given explanation that they were built by men with oxes and carts, some of these stones are literally tons and they're used in the wall. So unless the glacier just happened to push everything in a perfect line, and then Native Americans came and put small rocks in between, maybe there's this a sliver of truth to that. But I think more than likely what we're seeing is the remnants of a very, very, very ancient culture. And due to the way minerals operate, these things that were once stone walls have sort of eroded into stone piles, which I think is super fascinating. If all of these stone walls used to be larger walls, and they kind of just became rubble, piles of rubble. Really wacky, far out theory. But when you look at the amount of stone rows there are in New England and how some of them seem to go into completely remote places where colonists never even settled, it just brings so many questions. Like, why are they saying these were all built by colonists and slaves? They didn't even have a lot of slaves in New England. They had slaves, but they not when they just got here, So it's very, very interesting. So that's what's been turning me on lately, creatively.
That's awesome. It just seems like the blanket answer for everything. They don't have an explanation for, slaves made it. It had to have been, right?
Right.
It's such BS. But yeah, Michael's awesome. We've had him on the show before at Susquehanna River Valley. The work he's done there is I watched the whole video series because I ran across him on Gramerica or something, right? And then got sucked down that rabbit hole. But yeah, definitely like looking into like your local area, you'd be surprised. Like I was kind of surprised about a little bit for like I recently moved, so like I can't really talk too much about the area I'm in now, but it's a tangent anyway. But yeah, dude, there's got to be some kind of I don't know, you want to call it Tartaria or something that's being hidden. But I think it's so exciting. The part that kind of turns me on about this subject is that there's so many people waking up to these subjects, and so many people are asking questions now. And it seems like that whatever veil of censorship that the powers that be have is slowly being kind of chipped away at. And so that's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think the more they push to like control us, the more it gives way for us to break free. Just a inverted way of looking at it. But I just had a conversation with Lindsay Sharman today where she basically talked about that same thing. And like we both kind of resonated with the thought that when so many people are turning themselves away from the global energy, that spiritual force that's constantly reaching out to all of us, in the same way a dam stops a river and the river water just flows around it, that energy is going to come into the people who are awake and aware with so much more velocity and volume than it would have been in the past, because now more than ever, people are literally shutting themselves off from the natural world and going into the metaverse and whatnot. But yeah, definitely been talking a lot about that on my podcast lately.
Metaverse.
Yeah.
I got rid of Facebook a while ago, and I don't want anything to do with Zuckerberg.
I hear you. I don't even like having the same first name as him.
Oh, no, didn't even know. Well, speaking of, what is the most embarrassing or humbling experience of your life?
Having the same first name.
It's Mark Zuckerberg.
Well, this answer, it brings me back to the martial arts thing in a way, because that definitely, I don't want to say that was the most humbling thing or the most embarrassing thing, but it definitely was a huge, huge wake up moment. I got, called out. Some kid wanted to fight me after school, and I rode my bike all the way back to the school after school to get into a fight with this kid. Right. So I ride my bike all the way there, and I show up, and there, of course, I show up by myself. There's a whole crowd waiting to see this fight. And I don't even know why this dude wanted to fight me. That was the weirdest thing, because it was at this time in my life where like these fights kept happening. I was in I think I was in 8th grade or 9th grade. And so I wasn't even in that high school yet. I was just there, right? I got beat up pretty quickly. It was like one of those things where he like speared me with like a spear tackle, get, grounded, ground and pound. And then some chick who was like in my class, her older sister and her were there watching. And her older sister like just starts freaking out and came in and saved me, like knocked the dude off of me and like totally saved me, which was cool because, okay, I'm not getting beat up anymore. But at the same time, I'm like, I just got saved by a chick. Like that's kind of emasculating in a way. And that really pushed me to go and become the martial artist that I became. That moment right there, I rode my bicycle home crying and, was really hurt. And I made myself into a man after that, by training and not seeking vengeance on this person either. Like, I don't think I ever fought him again. I never like had the intention of like beating him up for what he did to me. But it was, as I got better and better at martial arts, that my reputation kind of solidified to what it was when I was a senior, so to speak, and still feel so young. But I had this reputation amongst my classmates of like being this amazing fighter, so tough. Nobody messed with him. But when I was in 8th grade and 9th grade, everybody thought of me as like a skinny, weak nerd, and I saw like how easily people were swayed, and I wasn't like a mean person. I didn't want to hurt anybody, but it was interesting how all these guys who would have just shoved me aside wanted to like get on their knees and, because I was a good martial artist, they went from totally disrespecting me to having a respect for no reason. It felt like I was almost like, why are you guys like, it just exposed them for having a weakness. And I realized that that's what I strengthened. I strengthened my inner self, not my outer self. It wasn't the fact that I became, I grew into 6'6" senior in high school. And I was like also training martial arts. Like physically I was imposing. People had a reason then to be afraid of me, but it was the psychological thing of like, oh, okay, I see what's really going on here. It's not about actually making yourself the toughest or being the strongest. It's just about being perceived that way. And all of these kids just care about how they're being perceived. And I started to not really care at all how I was perceived. And that only helped me as I dove further and further into these like kind of fringe subjects and did things like became an artist. I started my own business as a crystal jewelry wrapper. I just made my own jewelry just on a whim and sold it to some stores, and then, dropped out of college and really did everything my own way in a sense. And I think that moment really kind of pushed me to look at the world and look at who I was looking up to differently and realize that what other people thought didn't really matter. Now, more recently, I guess the most embarrassing thing would probably be like, oh man, on a podcast for sure. Like, and this is like so therapy for me. So excuse me for like getting into all my most embarrassing moments.
No, go for it. Go for it.
So Sam Tripoli had me on Tinfoil Hat to talk about Aleister Crowley. And I spent like 4 weeks researching, mostly because he pushed the interview back a couple times. So I just had more and more time to research. And at the end of the conversation, my goal was to expose Crowley as like a a really negative influence on so many people, but also to show that, you can't really not learn. Like, that doesn't mean you shouldn't learn from him, right? Just because somebody's evil doesn't mean we can't learn from them. And that doesn't make what they were doing with the occult, or it doesn't make the occult evil just because he was doing that with the occult, right? That was kind of my goal, was to clarify that, because I had heard a lot of people try to defend Crowley. And really, I didn't like that, because he wasn't a great person. He had things that he had been accused of, and quite possibly crimes that he had committed. I mean, maybe it was propaganda in the time, but my intention was to clear that up on the show. I love Tinfoil Hat. I listened to every single episode religiously, went and saw Sam live a bunch, met Sam, had the opportunity to go on his show and, be on Tinfoil Hat. It was huge. I was like, I got to do this right, And if you go back and you listen to that interview, it was great. But at the end, Sam gets really mad and starts arguing with me and saying, like, Crowley's a piece of shit. And like, he thought towards the end, I was defending Crowley. And I get all these emails from people who are like, oh, you're dark arts, you're black magic. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but that's like what they felt like they needed to get their anger out with Crowley against me for whatever reason. But it was kind of embarrassing in the sense that I'm like, did I just stick my neck out for this guy that, that never has done anything for me other than wrote these books that anyone else could have bought and anyone else could have read from? And I chose to go out like on the main stage and stick my neck out for him. So it was a little embarrassing, but honestly, it helped me out big time, because it showed people the caliber of research I was capable of putting out. And it helped my show grow, and I got a lot of way more messages from people, even to this day, saying that they really loved that interview. And really the hate messages came only in that first week, and like ever since, it's all been positive, because I think what I did was like give him a fair shake. Like, I wasn't like some guys you'll see go on podcasts and like the Duncan Trussell podcast and be like, which Duncan's been on this podcast, shout out to Duncan. But in my opinion, he kind of has like a grandized view of this guy. And I wanted to maybe show people the less savory reasons to know Crowley. And then, to finalize it in embarrassment, my buddy Alex Stein has a podcast called The Conspiracy Castle. And it's fun, it's off the rails, he's kind of nuts, and he talks about a lot of conspiracy stuff, and I've definitely had some moments on there that I regret for sure, just because like when you're putting yourself out there on a live stream, like you can't edit it out afterwards, you can't take it back. So there's probably like an argument I got into with Alex once or twice that shouldn't be on YouTube anymore, that probably still is. And yeah, definitely like learning the boundaries and how to set boundaries and what to share with people who are listening to these type of shows, and what to be honest about and what not to be honest about. And, my girlfriend, who I love with all my heart, is on my show all the time, as much as she'll participate. So I definitely have been very transparent with the people that know me through my show. But at the same time, like, I'm trying to figure out those boundaries, because I don't want to give people too much. I want to maintain a sense of identity and privacy,
Yeah, that's something that I'm kind of learning as I go along too, with maintaining that balance. But just to speak to the Aleister Crowley thing, like, I'd totally take a good quote from a bad chapter, and that's kind of what I would describe the Crowley thing as. Like, yeah, the dude probably wasn't a good dude, but like, learn something from him. And it's not that doesn't go just for Crowley. I've got this quote on, speaking of quotes, got this quote on the homepage of our website by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It says, "In my walks, every man I meet is my superior in some way, and in that I learn from him." So if you can learn something from somebody, even though maybe the guy wasn't like the best or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that, right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I don't know. I just thought I'd put my 2 cents in there.
Yeah.
And I also liked that you mentioned the when after you sought martial arts, and then that's when that to me it sounded like it was more of like an initiation rite into manhood. Is that kind of how that made you feel when you went through that process?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was. It was a lot of things. I grew up in a house where with a mother and father who work very hard, but with working hard comes less time to spend with your kids, right? So definitely a lot of time spent alone, being the oldest of 2 kids, and having a younger sister. We didn't have that much in common, and so I would spend a lot of time alone and interacting with people, peers, was always very difficult because when I was younger, there were things that happened that made me really afraid of how other people would perceive me, kind of like how I was saying before with the honesty thing, And I think martial arts brought this whole newfound sense of confidence that really I think every person, not just men, should undergo, and it's really sad that we don't have these sorts of rites of passages in our Western society anymore, or at least they're very hard to come by or not obvious. And, again, this is something I talked about with my Sifu when I had him on my podcast, episode 94. And he and I, kind of made that exact point is there's no rites of passages anymore, but it gave me confidence to like be myself and know that, nobody's gonna like threaten me, anymore. And that kind of was a relief because it's like, okay, I can be myself enough to know that I'm not going to get hurt for what I say, and that also came with like, okay, well, don't be an asshole. That doesn't mean you can just treat people like crap. You got to be nice to people and treat people with respect. Then you don't even need to use martial arts because people just like you. And that kind of brings me to our the next question, which I'll let you ask it before I answer it because it kind of fits in perfectly with that whole thing.
What is your greatest fear? How did you overcome it?
Well, and I think that was people were my greatest fear, like how other people would perceive me. So I overcame that. Really, like I said, I dropped out of college just knowing that wasn't the right fit for me, and I would find my own path somehow, some way. And I just kind of kept getting jobs because if I didn't, my dad would berate me and tell me I was a loser, tell me to get the hell out of the house. So I always had to have a job, go out and do something. But I never liked, working in a job that I wasn't allowed to smoke pot. If there was like a drug test or like some like time thing where pot wasn't involved. Like even when I worked at a grocery store, I made sure I went out on my lunch break and smoked pot, So like that was for whatever reason, not advocating for that lifestyle, but that was a big thing for me. And, and having jobs that pushed me outside of that introspective world that I loved being in when I was high, like Citizens Campaign for the Environment, where I canvassed for people, and like a farmer's market where I sold bread every weekend and actually got to know all of the customers, and everybody who came consistently looked forward to talking to me, even if it was for just a minute or two as they bought the same loaf of bread they bought every week. It was like having that feeling of like, if I don't become outgoing, the things that I want to accomplish in life are going to become harder and harder and harder. So I saw the synchronicity of my path, how it was unfolding. And I realized like, oh, that job gave me this skill that I used at that job, and that job gave me the next skill. So I started to see how things were piecing together, like how the first job led into the next one and the next one. And the farmer's market job was so many things because I was a delivery guy and I was also this dude that would be at the market and talking to all these people and very like loud. I would say like, ladies and gentlemen, gather around, come try the freshest bread in town. And I had all these rhymes that went after that, so I was very like outgoing and I pushed myself to do that because there was the financial incentive. Obviously, the more bread we sold, the more my commission was. But I realized like, okay, I'm only going to be this young for this many years. If I want to have a wife, if I want to have a career, if I want to have a house, I gotta really hone in these things that are my tools in my tool belt, and my voice, my presence have always been called upon. I'm 6'8". That's not a very common trait. So I'm always seen. Like when I walk into a room, people have something to say to me, and it's always the same thing. Do you play basketball? Or some other crap related to my height. So I've always had that like, oh, you gotta talk to people because people always want to talk to you, and it just never felt right. Feeling introspective, I felt like I was missing out on the world around me. Like I had all these thoughts in my head and I couldn't get them out. I couldn't convey them to people. And it took a long time, and it took doing something else to get to where I'm at now. Like I didn't start, a conspiracy stand at the farmer's market, and I talked about bread, and I got really good at talking to people about bread. And that worked in a really magical way because the delivery side of the job gave me hours and hours of time to educate myself while getting paid. And then the communication side of things, like, made it so I wasn't isolated. Because if you're a driver, people listening right now, probably there's some of them working that kind of job right now. Like, it's an isolating job. You don't talk to many people. And the way I did it was I pushed myself to talk to as many people, even though I couldn't, because I was out on the road. So I would go to a coffee shop. I would try to have a long conversation with the person at the coffee shop or whoever I ran into at the restaurant delivery where I was delivering the bread. So things like that, where I used those jobs that weren't what I wanted to be doing, I used them to get to where I wanted to be. So not only was it like finding a way to use my voice, but it was also like making the best of a situation, because that was the other fear, is like, how am I going to have the life I want to live? Like, how am I going to do the things I want to do? I was born in one of the second highest per capita income states, like there's a lot of wealthy people in the state that I was born into. And I am not one of those people. So I got to figure out how I'm going to make mine, and I definitely don't want to do it working for someone else's dime, and that's what I've really, that's my new biggest fear. Now it's no longer other people. It's myself. I'm afraid of, how I'm going to do these things and accomplish these things that I want to accomplish, really, I guess. And it's not really a fear. It's more of a motivation, I guess.
Well, you said the phrase working on someone else's dime. What I heard was time. And that to me is like, because I've been having this conversations about Time Lords and how it really, what's the most important about time is being present in the moment. Yet we have names for the days of the week, and being on somebody else's time or dime, working for somebody else, like there's some like magical thing having to be at a certain specific place at a specific time. And then so by you having the guts to drop out of college, even though you were scared to do that and unsure of like what the future had in store, like you took your time back is what it sounds like, or the pieces I'm putting together. So
thank you.
Like that's amazing.
Yeah. I tried to, at least, I think I didn't realize that was the fear. It was really more imposed upon me because I just enjoyed being, and the pressures of life come from your parents. You got to go do something. You got to go, I had it easy. I was living in my dad's house. I didn't have to pay rent. The only thing I had to do was like deal with the headache of them like telling me to get the hell out and go find my own place to live, which eventually I did. Still kind of in the process of doing that fully, but the podcast is certainly helping with that in the sense that now I really have my own time back, and I work for myself. So I have to, constantly be thinking of where that next paycheck is coming from, because it's not a salary and it's not weekly. It's based on what I'm doing in that freelance kind of way. So yeah, support me on Patreon if you like what you heard so far.
Yeah. You made us. You switched timelines. Like you wouldn't have been in this position if you stayed in college, right? So
right. Absolutely,
that's awesome. Question number 9: what is your single greatest driving force in life, and how do you further it?
So I think this, has been touched on throughout the whole conversation, but I'm going to throw the curveball in. Is like nature has always been extremely, extremely familiar to me, even more so than my family and like society. Being in the forest, being around animals has always felt extremely familiar. So for whatever that is, that's always been my primary drive. Like when I was a kid, I wanted to know everything about animals. I wanted to know every animal, where they were on the planet, what their behavior was, and all the different things. And even to this day, like I have a pretty good memory for that, and can probably make my way as a zoologist if I really tried. But the reason I bring that up is because I don't think what I'm doing now is very different from what I wanted to do when I was a kid. I was interested in all those things because I wanted to understand the world around me. And that was like a kind of a starting place. And I still care so much about not just animals, but all of us, human beings, children, rocks, trees, herbs, the little ones, as I call it, all the little bacteria and the little creatures that we don't see, that the smaller creatures that we do see eat, and then all up the chain, all the way up to us. If we want to think of ourselves at the top of the natural hierarchy, maybe I don't think we deserve to be there anymore, but that's what drives me is we as human beings have, at least from the perspective of modernity and maybe just the propaganda of the way we think the world is, there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of disharmony. So finding harmony, I think, is the number one drive for me. And why that means nature is because there's very clearly an imbalance in the interaction between human beings and the natural world. So that's where like my conspiracy stuff comes from, spirituality, alternative history, all of it, I think, fits into that same approach. And it's not the like social justice warrior, Green New Deal type of thing where I think people should pay carbon credits and all that. But it's very, very obvious that corporations are doing that in order to create a smokescreen so that people blame themselves rather than the real culprit, which is big business and government, really treating our Mother Earth as just another slave in the slave system that they've set up. So that's what drives me, is because I've always felt like, I needed to liberate nature. And then I kind of realized like, oh, well, those eco terrorists might be like paid actors or something. So I don't know. I don't want to like come off as one of those guys, but that's definitely like one of the main drives for me. And that's another reason why I loved the Grimerica show so much, because Darren, not to like characterize him by his race, but like he's an indigenous person, and that's not a common thing in this space. And I've drawn a lot of inspiration from indigenous people from all walks of life. And I think Darren is, a really, really interesting person who, was behind the creation of this show, but also the Grimerica show, which, like we kind of mentioned, I don't know, before we were recording, it's like a hub of synchronicities. Like there's a lot of power in that show and the effect it can have on your life if you open up to it. So yeah, in a long roundabout way of saying things like, I was born in North America. I believe that connects me to this land and the people who were living here long before the colonists came, and they lived in harmony with nature. So what drives me is finding that harmony for myself, and even more so allowing that harmony to exist for other people, and maybe showing people how to find that too. And maybe even through that, validating the tragedy that did happen to these indigenous people, because I think they've been forgotten and they've been discarded. I think when you realize the power that they, or the love that they had for the earth and the power that comes from that, I think it goes beyond race, and it can have an effect on humanity as a whole. And I think we all are kind of looking for that. But for me, it's that path that I'm trying to follow, through the woods with the indigenous spirits guiding me.
Yeah, and nature is definitely a huge part of that world. The plant kingdom. There's a quote in a book, Weaving Sweetgrass, I think, and it says, speaking of First Nations or Native Americans, American Indians, however you want to call it, there's a quote that I saw it on a meme, to be honest. Okay, I'll just do that. But it translates that some plants translates to those who help us in some languages, right? So, and a lot of people think about, like, cannabis or ayahuasca or there's a few other, like iboga. These things are here to help us, yeah, but something that I've personally done recently is, and I'll tie this back around, but is developing a relationship with cacao, ceremonial cacao. And it does a lot of work with your heart chakra, your heart energy. And but my point is with this is that the amount of knowledge that is to be had within the plant kingdom and within the cultures that kept that knowledge alive and perpetuated throughout time is extremely valuable. And I think that's one of the driving forces behind Darren's the impetus to start 13 Questions, is to kind of memorialize that knowledge, because we are we're standing on the shoulders of giants. So we are ascendants of those that came before us, not descendants.
Yeah. And it's like the podcasting is the new oral tradition. Same way that wisdom was passed down from father to son, grandfather to grandson, and spoken word. Now we're sharing what we know to be true for anyone to listen to. They could just, synchronistically find the name of this podcast, however people find podcasts. And I think it's only synchronistic, because there isn't any like big push mainstream advertising unless you're Joe Rogan. I think Joe Rogan's done the rest of the podcasting community a big favor by bringing so many people. I myself included. I probably wouldn't have listened to podcasts if I didn't find Joe Rogan somehow. And I think what people are really finding when they do make that link and reconnect with podcasts is that they're reconnecting with that more ancient way that human beings learned. And, learning is just love earned,
That's so neat that I never thought of podcast as the new oral tradition. That's really cool. I never thought about that before.
Well, not like the Guys We Fucked podcast, but like other
yeah, right.
Some podcasts,
right? Not this one.
I would say definitely this one because, like you said, Darren had an intention he set when he created this, and you and Adam took up the torch and carried it on, which I think is super cool. And that's why I wanted to be a part of it. I'm like, oh wow, this is still a thing. Yes, sign me up.
Right? Yeah, it's been wild. Like, I'm just excited to see where it goes.
Definitely.
All right, question number 10. Who were/are your role models and why?
So, I couldn't talk about martial arts as much as I have without mentioning Bruce Lee, because he definitely is a role model for so many people, myself included. And there's some people who don't like him, whatever. But I think that Tao of Jeet Kune Do, his book, was huge for me. Not only because it had really cool like fighting moves, like the oblique kick, one of the really underrated self-defense moves that was called the duck kick in his book, which always just stuck with me. But Bruce Lee, starts his book off by going into the Tao and teaching you about the Tao, and then teaching you about his philosophy behind martial arts. And those philosophical concepts, I remember really like sitting with them and really like stopping at that part of the book and coming back to it more and more and more. So he was a big inspiration. I don't know. I think cannabis has been, not to like turn it into, it's not really like a person, but cannabis has been a very interesting teacher for me. And I would say my mentor, my first mentor, who I kind of talk about a lot on my podcast, because he's really particular to my journey into all this stuff. A man named Amos Daly, who moved from Arizona to where I live in Connecticut to protest Skull and Bones, the secret society, and how they have Geronimo's skull and thigh bones, his femur bones, in the tomb, their secret society building on campus. This is part of his like religious pilgrimage, so to speak, to make up for some things that he had to right wrongs for. And he kind of met me at a time when I was still in college, about to drop out, and we became friends, and he taught me a lot about his culture, being a Pueblo. He had a lot of obviously Native American wisdom to share, but it was also just like a real human being. And at 19 years old, it wasn't that easy to meet someone who could be that real with you, as real as he was with me. Because people tend to talk to you for who you are as a teenager, when he was kind of like treating me like I was an adult. And that was interesting, but there's a lot I learned from Amos. So he was a role model for sure. And that's why I bring him up with cannabis, because he kind of put it to me that like, well, like this could be a tool if you use it responsibly and you connect with it, and you don't just do it to get high, and you don't just do it to block out things, because it's going to do what you want it to do. And I don't think most people get that, like the law of attraction, how it works. It's something you really have to figure out. And he helped me figure it out. A couple other people helped me figure it out. But I kind of want to give like an answer of a role model that's less personal, I guess, because I don't know. I feel like Bruce Lee, Amos for sure, but role model, I don't know. I think my higher self. This is a tough question for me. I think there's definitely potential for us to find, a mentor around every corner. So that's how I kind of see it. It's like I've had different mentors for different stages in my life, and Amos came into my life at a very important time. But since then, I've had many different mentors, and they've come in all different forms, not just men older than me, women, people younger than me, animals even. So I don't have one role model. I think I have an ever-present mentor who switches roles depending on what is pertinent in my life. And lately, I think Sam Tripoli has been a role model for sure in the few conversations we have that are kind of, on the phone. Michael Wan, of course, role model for sure because of all the work he's put out and now doing a podcast with him. But like, those are people I have a sort of a personal relationship with now. So I think, yeah, besides like Bruce Lee, who's kind of known beyond, I never met him personally. Most of my role models are kind of close to the chest, and maybe even some are like people I wouldn't even mention, just because who the hell would know them? Like Amos, I've talked about him a bunch on my podcast, and I do hope to reconnect with him one day if he still is around. But as far as role models go, I think it's a open slot right now. There's an open slot for another one, but Sam and Michael Wan are definitely big ones. Mike Romanelli, who has his own podcast, he's become a buddy of mine. See, now I feel like I'm like leaving people out, and I just have to stop. Like Ron from New England, of course, is another buddy of mine. Now I'm just giving shout out.
No, I like that it's constantly evolving. I think that's a good thing, right? Like it'd be weird if somebody grew up and they had like one role model their entire life and like they just became that person like as they got older, right? That'd be weird.
That does happen to some people, unfortunately. My first karate teacher was a huge Chuck Norris head. He loved Chuck Norris. I think he became his own version of Chuck Norris. So that's definitely a real thing.
Yeah, good to have many. What is it? Flavor, spice, variety is the spice of life. There we go. Getting my phrases mixed up. Soliloquisms. You ever seen that? What is it? Boondock Saints. You've seen Boondock Saints, right? The movie Boondock Saints. No, there's this bartender that always mixes up his sayings. He's like make like a tree and leave instead of. And he's got Tourette's too, so he just says make like a tree and get that fuck out of here. I don't know. That's who I remind me of sometimes. My little avatar is animal on Discord. I'm just all over the place. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, question number 11. What quality do you most admire in a woman?
This is definitely a difficult question because I definitely don't have like a long list of women I've been with in my life. I have like maybe a couple, and I have someone that I'm seeing now who's really amazing. So there's a lot I admire about her. But I think like when I was single, if I were to ask or be asked this question, I would say like something along the lines of like mutual interest. But now that I'm in a relationship, I would say maybe the answer is something more along the lines of like a quality that I admire is like being self-driven and being like an equal participant in the relationship, which is something I found with the relationship I'm in now, which is really cool. As a matter of fact, my girlfriend and I do a podcast together, and like I said, getting over that fear of speaking and how people will perceive me is something that I probably overcame a couple years ago. So for her, it's kind of new and it's a challenge. So now I'm like learning a lot and learning how to teach her how to do this or how to at least find, because it's not something that you can just teach someone, it's not like riding a bike or swimming, where you can be like, well, once you get in the water, you got to go like this. And Like it's like swimming in the sense that you can only do it through like jumping in and getting it and doing it. You can't just like think about how to podcast and then be good at it. You have to fail a bunch and like put out some episodes that might not be great until you get to a point where, you're happy with what you're doing. And if it's something that you're going to enjoy doing, then you should be driven to get into it. Right. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And she's awesome. So she makes it easy. But at the same time, it is a challenge on a personal level to teach somebody something that kind of came naturally to me, but also took a long time to figure out as well for myself. So unlike martial arts, where as soon as I figured it out, I was able to teach people right away. So I've always thought of myself as kind of good at teaching. But now I'm realizing not everything is as easy to teach. Like you could show someone how to kick and then identify pretty quickly what they're doing wrong, and then you say, okay, well, you're not turning your foot. You got to turn your foot, and then your hip will extend. And then once your hip is extending, now you're doing a proper side kick. Because when your foot was not moving, the base foot, your whole side kick gets thrown off. And I can see them doing that and be like, here, do that instead. And they have that moment of like, oh, wow, that feels like a side kick, right? Whereas with this kind of thing, it's very subjective. It's very personal. It's very, it's expressing your inner self. How do you teach someone to do that? I don't know if you can. I think you really can just help them and encourage them and maybe show them how you did it and hope that that's, going to help them. But I mean, I don't think there's one way to do it is the other side of it. Is like in art, there are many ways to do it. And to bring up Michael Wan again, something that he said that was really cool is like, I started making my art the way I made it because I didn't want somebody to tell me I was doing it wrong. Like instead of becoming a painter and becoming an apprentice as a painter, I just started my own type of art. I just cut little pieces of paper and arranged them. And like that way I'm not, who can tell me I'm doing it wrong? I invented this form of art, right? That's kind of how I feel about podcasting. It's not something that has a set defined methodology to accomplish it, whereas martial arts is a little more structured. I know we totally like that's like how are you answering that question with that? And that's what I admire in a woman.
Yeah. No, you said something that struck me. That's the self-driven aspect of a woman. I think that's something that it's important to look for and to have in a partner, because I've been in relationships where like you're the only one that's giving. It's a one-way street. So if the other person has the same energy to move forward and to give too, like it works so much better instead of one person doing all the work. So to be self-driven, right?
Right. No, that was the case in many of my past relationships. So it is a relief that is not the case this time. But in the sense of like creative expression, there's definitely like she wants to do podcasts as well. So I'm like, well, who better to teach you than me? But it's not easy.
Yeah, it's not like it's like it's like teaching how do you live life, right? Like you can't teach anybody like how do you create a good show. I was like, well, what do people find interesting, right? It's really subjective.
Thank you. Yes, that's the other side of it. Is it's completely subjective, right? It's art. Some people are going to appreciate what you do, and some people aren't. I think the mark of a true, artist is having that sense for your own work and being able to criticize yourself. Because when you can criticize yourself, you can constantly improve without really relying on the input of others.
Yeah. And that is what we think about women. No. All right. Question number 12. What is the most courageous thing you have ever done or seen in your life?
Wow. I feel like this is a tough question because I do like having a sense of humility and not like boasting about things that I've done. But I definitely am the type of person who runs into a situation if I feel like someone needs my help. So there's been a couple times, like one time I saw a woman getting dragged into like a current under a bridge, and I like jumped into the water and pulled her to the shore. Not that heroic, given that if she went under the bridge, she would have just ended up in a swamp. It wasn't like a deadly situation, but I think she just didn't realize that she was getting pulled into a current, and I happened to be in the right spot to see what was happening and intercede. And then there was another time where like this dude was just getting beat up on the side of the road across the street from this bar I was hanging out at. And I'm not just going to hold a beer while somebody's getting hurt. So I ran across the street and like kind of stood a foot away. And when the guy realized that someone was challenging him back, he kind of like stopped what he was doing and got back in his car. But we saw the whole thing unfold. He like gets out of the car, says, "Hey, mother effer," a bunch of curse words I won't repeat, and then like starts beating this guy up. And so I got in his way in a sense. But I think speaking my truth has always been really hard, like and took a lot of courage. Like I used to literally shake in moments of confrontation, and I found that using my words was always harder than using like my physical action, right? And that's not to say that that's a good thing, like, oh well, since it's easier then you should fight. I think it's 10 times out of 10 more courageous to stand up to somebody with love. Like in that situation where the guy was getting beat up, like I didn't like run over and punch the guy punching the other guy. I ran over and told him to stop and challenged him, and that made the situation stop. I didn't have the intention of fighting him. I think I made that intention pretty clear to him, that if he chose to fight me, he wouldn't be, he wouldn't have an easy go, right? So that was courageous in the sense that like that guy could have had a knife, he could have had a gun, he could have just jumped on me and beat me up. And I ran into the throes of danger to save someone I never met before. I think that, is something we all need to do because we're all human beings. We're all part of the all, however word you want to use to define it. So standing up for other people, if a situation like that presents itself, is something I definitely recommend people do. And especially if you're a martial artist, because I think that's like one of the responsibilities we have as martial artists is to use those skills for good in a Jedi kind of way, but again, like I don't want to aggrandize myself because that wasn't really like anything like too heroic anyways. I think, with and I'm trying to tread lightly on this subject, but with what's been going on in the past 2 years, the most heroic thing I think I could do is not wear a mask at all if I can, or at least put up a fight when people told me to wear a mask. So that's what I've been doing lately. And I think everybody who's dealt with it, I'm not alone. Like everybody's dealt with this thing. And I had to put on a mask to go in the grocery store. Eventually they broke me and, made me do it. But I stood up as much as I could. And that was a big motivation for getting into the podcasting thing as well, because I did feel like my voice was being stifled, quite literally being muzzled, just to go to a grocery store. And there are stores that I have never gone back to since that happened because they, were really tough about the mask thing. And I'm in a state where the politics are kind of leaning that way anyways, too. So it's just been really difficult in that sense. Seeing how many people just go with authority and go blindly. So standing up and not wearing a mask seems like the bravest thing you can do nowadays. And like I kind of explained, I've always been a black sheep, so to speak, an outlier on the fringe. So it's not particularly uncomfortable nowadays when I go into a store and I'm not wearing a mask and everyone else is, and I get the occasional glance from someone like, "Hey, jerk, why aren't you wearing a mask?" I just brush it off. I don't care. But yeah, I think that is courageous, and I encourage people to do that. And if you know in your heart that this thing is not scientific, as we probably both know, then stand up, and stand up for what you believe in, because otherwise we're all going to fall.
Absolutely. This show isn't really geared towards, so it's really hard to talk about current events, but it comes up, so it's like unavoidable. But absolutely, like the whole mask thing, I'm on the same page with you. And the phrase that you said that stuck out to me is standing up with love. And when it comes to the issues over the past 2 years, like it's really hard to do, like the last part with love. And like, I don't really know. I don't have answers, I've got some ideas of how people can approach the situation. Right. But it's really too subjective to give a blanket answer to everybody. But I hope that, with podcasts like this one and yours and other shows, that it is, we are standing up and out of love, hopefully. I mean, that's what we're doing. So, yeah, if there ever was a time, dude, yeah, now would be it. Seems like it, right?
Yeah. That's why. And I see what you mean. Cause this podcast is timely in that sense that people can listen to it 20, 30 years from now, and it'll still be worthwhile, the subjects you guys talk about, which is why it's an honor to be a part of it. But yeah, I think it can apply to any situation when we are faced with authority and the tyranny of authority. It can be really, really, really demoralizing when you see that you're the only one standing up against something that you believe to be wrong. So just know that you are never alone in that defiance. And if you know in your heart that what you believe to be true goes against what authority tells you to be true, then stand up, because you're not alone. That's happened for thousands and thousands of years in human history. People have stood up and been martyrs. And in the wake of their passing, usually tragic passing, they inspire much more than they could have while they were alive, unfortunately. And that is the, tragedy of being a martyr, is that most times people take up your cause in response to your death. So it's kind of like the bravest person stands up and bears the brunt of it. And then the reaction comes from the sympathy of the people who kind of realize, like, oh crap, I believed everything this guy did and I didn't stand up like he did. I got to make up for that. So I hope we don't get to a point in this modern world where there are martyrs for this cause. But I think that's the level of what we're facing in many ways. Maybe not as severe in the sense that nobody's fighting in the streets with swords and nobody's hopefully going to be strung up to be hung or from the gallows or anything like that. But I think in this new technocratic world, the way you opt out is by not participating and by helping this kind of counter economic movement where you incentivize, like I said, the businesses that don't infringe upon your rights and support them rather than the ones that are going fully into this thing. But I totally don't want to go on that tangent, because this is, like you said, a very timely show. So hopefully in a couple of years, people will be like, what's that about? I don't remember that.
Right? Yeah. Who knows what'll happen in a few years? All right. Question 13. What does it mean to be a man in today's world?
Jeez, I think I think what's cool about this show is it's gone on for a couple of years, so I wonder how much that answer's changed over time. But I think what it means to be a man to me in today's world, I don't really understand the question that well, but I'm going to do my best to answer it. I don't know if
well, you can take it two ways. Adam usually says this part. But you can take it as a man, as in like a human being, like that way, or like the gender specific man.
Right.
So
okay,
that helps.
I'll go with the gender specific first. I think what it means to be a man is to start a family, and have a family and create a family with a woman in a co-creative effort. And I think, unfortunately, our society kind of de-incentivizes that in many different ways and incentivizes single family homes through social programs and things like that. So I think that shows to me that if they're going after it, then the inverse of that means that there's something about it that is potentially good that they want to invert for their, so that they can make money off of it or manipulate people or push their agenda forward. But I think being a man, is providing for your family. And that's what all beings are striving to do, is procreate and push life forward. So on a really simple, natural level, we need to start a family. We need to provide for the woman that we love and the children that we create with that woman. And then as a man, as a human being, what it means to be human, I think, is to be kind of like what I said when I was talking about nature, is like not a steward, because I think that term gets conflated with like farming and things like that. I think we need to be stewards of the land in the sense that we need to be like 100% familiar with the land, know the world around us, know nature, the same way that the indigenous people that we discussed as well earlier, of this continent and every continent, because it is universal. There are people who have existed with that close connection to Mother Earth. And I think that is what it means to be human, is to be in a relationship with Mother Earth. And I think the empire, to use that label to kind of label the governments of the world, the empire is constantly trying to disconnect us from Mother Earth. So to me, what it means to be human is to know your immediate environment and know, where your food's coming from and all of the other things, water. And I think that's what society does. They cut us off from Mother Nature. You start drinking and eating food that comes out of plastic containers. And then you're just like one of those dust bowl thing. What are those things called that kick around?
Dustables?
Yeah, those
Dustables?
things. You're just going with the wind, any direction they'll push you, you'll go, because you're not rooted, you're not connected to the earth, and I think that's what being a human is being connected to the earth, but I'm a big fan of Hermeticism. So I think fan is a silly word, but I'm a student of Hermeticism, and I think gender is really interesting. I think what's interesting about it is that we all have masculine and feminine traits within us as well. And balancing that in our partner is also something that I want to kind of add to that first statement I made, because I don't think necessarily that all people are created equally. And if you find that balance in your relationship, if you're a little more feminine and she's a little more masculine, or vice versa, I think that's just spice of, or the spice of life, like you said before. It really is, man. I mean, there is no one way to do it. I think when you get into the topic of what it means to be a man, you get all these manly man answers, and like, I'm sure you've heard some of them, but like, I do kind of resonate with that. I think being a man is really undervalued in our society today, and it gets kind of balked at, like, oh well, you're so brutish for trying to be masculine, when really what they're portraying is like negative masculinity, egotistical masculinity. I think true masculinity is an intelligent masculinity. It's a supportive, it's a nurturing, a protective masculinity, not a aggressive and apex predator type. I think we're meant to be apex protectors, right? This whole idea, survival of the fittest and every man for himself. I think those are all just given to us from this kind of Aristotle master slave sort of logic to warp us from our connection to nature and our true role as one half of the yin yang, masculine and feminine. I think are part of the just the way that the universe expresses itself, not just as a man or a woman human being, but like every species that's not asexual is either man or a woman, right? In a sense. And then I think we even see that in things like trees, rocks, the sky, the stars. You can anthropomorphize these things, and humans have done that in our mythology. We've given characteristics to these natural forces. So for me, that's being like an air sign, kind of like adds a lot to my side of being masculine. And like, I'm not just like any old masculine. I'm like an airy masculine sort of person, I feel like, and all the things that come with that. Maybe a discussion for a different day, but yeah, I think that's what being a man means to me, is like connecting with nature and your role as a human being.
That's awesome. I love how simply you put it, to start a family. Start and have a family and have a relationship with the land. Yeah. Because it's the same as it always has, really, if you think about it. And it seems like it's a little bit, like you touched on that point. It's like more difficult now, just because it's bad to be a straight white male in society. So
that's the impression. And yeah, like I said, I live in a pretty like liberal state, and Yale University is not too far from me, and they're big like cultural center, right? And it's all that type of thing, man, where they're just making us feel bad for who we are, which is exactly what they're fighting against too, which is so silly, because they think that we created this world where they were not equal to us, and now they have to make us not equal to them and flip it. It's just a whole thing that I'm totally unequipped to get into, but when I feel it, it just gets me a little angry, and that's why standing up with love is the most important thing, because even though I might not agree with those people and they might see me as the enemy, if I love them, it totally disarms that attack that they're constantly ready to throw at you, because they're just in that reactionary mindset. And I think love is all pervasive. It only inspires a certain set of reactions in that way.
Yeah, it's self-replicating.
Exactly.
Well, you are officially out of the hot seat. That was the 13 questions.
Right on, dude. Appreciate it.
Well, what did you? I mean, we've already kind of touched on this, but like, what do you think about the show? I guess now that you've gone through the questions, how was it like going through, thinking of answers, or just reflecting on them?
Well, I'll be super honest. At first, I was like, "Oh man, what did I get myself into? These questions are tough. Like, not in like a hard sense, but like you have to connect. I think with yourself to really try to answer them. And like I said, like honesty is very important to me. So I don't want to just come on the show and say anything, because I hope this is around long enough for maybe even like future kid of mine to listen to, and be like, oh wow, dad was pretty wise when he was my age. Like maybe I should listen to him now, because I definitely think like my dad would be benefiting from something like that if I had like a way to look into the past and see how cool my dad was when he was my age. But like now, like at this time in my life, I'm like, oh, my dad sucks, but I'll come around. I'll love him again, I'm sure. But yeah, I think this was a lot of fun, and it definitely pulled me into a certain mindset that I get into with certain guests on the show. And I always like when I have guests like that on, where we connect on this level of like sort of philosophy. And that's why I put my podcast in that category, because that's what I like to do, is really just like philosophize. I don't know. I mean, it to sound really corny maybe, but philosophy is like, the love of Sophia, philosophy, like love of wisdom. And I think gnosis is a part of that somewhere too. So this was kind of like a really big honor for me too, as a 27-year-old person, to add my wisdom to the mix. Cause it's like, I'm only lived so long. I'm sure there are much wiser people you'll have on and have had on. But if anybody, appreciates anything I've said, thank you. I appreciate you for listening. And I hope you'll get in touch with me and let me know, because that's definitely why I like doing these shows and being as transparent and honest as I can be. Because when I first found podcasts, I realized I was lacking an intimate connection with people, right? Because the whole of the media I was consuming taught me that the world was a certain way and this is how people were. But then I realized, no, that's all manufactured. That's all created and produced in writing rooms with cameras and directors, and all that stuff is manipulated to give you a certain taste that then they will use to create you into a consumer and then, use you for the rest of your life. Podcasting is just other people who want to put these, conversations out there, whether it's because they're talking about things that they think are informative, exciting, interesting. I mean, all of the above, and everything in between. I think the real reason people are going to podcasts is because of that intimate connection. And I've learned so much about just being myself through connecting in that fly on the wall kind of way with other people like Graham and Darren and Sam Tripoli and Greg Carlwood and all these other kind of conspiracy podcasters that I follow. So yeah, man, it was definitely, if I helped add to the roster of really awesome people on the 13 Questions podcast feed, then that's a win for me, man. This is a good time.
You did, absolutely, man. It was a pleasure talking with you. I love to get feedback like that, because that's exactly what we're going for with the show. I love the whole standing up with love. And I think that starts with looking within. And I hope that's what this show does, prompts in other people, right? Is to know thyself first. And then you can work out from there, and we can change the world. But to change, be the change you want to see first, right? So know thyself, not just what they tell you on TV, right?
Yeah, and I'll hit you with another one that's on my website, myfamilythinksimcrazy.com. It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to an extremely sick society. And I think that is the primary thing with podcasters is we're typically against the grain types of people. And I think we're not well adjusted. We're our own type. We're our own breed. So if you're a podcast listener You're definitely a friend of mine, whether I talk to you ever or never. But today I made a new friend in you, buddy. And this was fun, man. Nice to meet you, Bill.
Oh, dude, thank you so much. Was there anything else that you wanted to plug besides your website, Instagram, or anything?
Any place that you're listening to this podcast, I can guarantee you'll also find my podcast. So just search My Family Thinks I'm Crazy and you'll find my podcast. We have a bunch of different ways you can support us, but we're on Rockfin too, which is like the cool kid club, Netflix of podcasting and whatever, Grimerica is there. They do a bunch of cool shows on Rockfin. Sam's on Rockfin. So a bunch of content there. And yeah, that's about it. Listen to the show if you like the vibe.
Why is one man rich and another man poor? Why we ain't satisfied? Why we gotta have more? Why your suicide rates on the rest so high? Why I tell you the truth but you say don't lie? Why is being a good father at an all-time low? Why is it acceptable? Yo, why I don't know. Why she blame him and he blame her? It's useless. Ask yourself this question. Why you making excuses? Why do parents gotta bury their kids? Why we text and drive, not caring how scary it is? Why it's so hard to forgive and leave the past behind? And if you did, then that's divine. Why don't you help your brother when you see him fall? Why do we act like God don't see it all? Why do we call them black, them white, them Asians and use labels? Now that's racism. I don't wanna Hawaii. Why? 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 I don't wanna Hawaii. Why is there innocent people locked up for life, while some people can't say nothing nice? Why do we always gotta question what all of it means? And why won't you follow your dreams? Tell me why. The night when you took my dad, why'd you let me see my grandpa cry? And tell me why. And why do you choose to hide, even though you was born to fly? And tell me why. And why don't we turn from all the hate? And why don't we learn from all mistakes? Why do I keep on wrecking these fat beats? And teachers don't make more than professional athletes? And why? And why? And why? And why? And why? And why? I don't wanna Hawaii. 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 I don't wanna Hawaii. Why? I don't wanna Hawaii. I don't wanna Hawaii. Why?
This should be considered entertainment and not therapy. We hope you benefit from our resources available at 13questionspodcast.com. Thank you for listening.